a reality check. Thanks for watching, and hit subscribe, tell your friends, like, and all that. And we're back reading from the book, Monument to the End of Time. Before I begin, I was talking to someone today, the great conspiracy theorist Bill Cooper was actually reading this very book on his radio show in, I believe it was late September 2001, when he died. He was killed by some sheriff's deputies. I just remembered that today when I was talking to somebody. So hopefully I won't get shot by the deputies for reading this. But he had other things going on. I don't think it was the reading of my book that got him killed. I think it was a lot of other things that he was saying in public that he probably should have been a little more discreet about. All right, today is we are on chapter 3, and this is section 2. And this is the alchemical eschatology of Christianity. This one's a whopper. At the core of Christianity is a cosmological mystery. The Gnostic Christians embraced the mystery, while the imperial orthodoxy sought to minimize, control, and literalize it. But the mystery persisted, and not even the church councils of the 4th century could completely banish or obscure it. Our modern view of the end of the world is entangled with the magical mystery at the heart of Christianity. To understand this mystery and its alchemical and apocalyptic importance, we must first look at how the Hebrew culture of Palestine in the 1st century came to develop its unique perspective on the end of all things. This way. The existence of the Old Testament is not by itself remarkable. Many other ancient sources are just as obsessed with the end of the world. Flood narratives and that of Noah in Genesis are common in almost every traditional culture on the planet. The Noah story originally comes from a Mesopotamian tale woven into the Epic of Gilgamesh. But the Old Testament is unique. Instead of treating its story as a chronicle or a collection of myths, the Old Testament was put together as a way to demonstrate the supernatural intervention of God in the course of human affairs. The early books of the Old Testament display a kind of historical unity, as if they were intended to make sense together, even if they were written at different times and under different circumstances. Thus, the passage of time is given meaning by its fulfillment of God's purpose. This sense of historical spirituality made the Hebrew worldview and the Christian, which grew from it, highly susceptible to the idea of an end to all things. However, this sense of historical unity was itself the product of an apocalyptic event, the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 587 BCE, and the subsequent return of the exiles a generation later. The Book of the Law of Moses was a combination of ancient texts found in the ruins of the temple and Mesopotamian myths absorbed during the exile. The new version emphasized the power of the Hebrew God to punish or reward his people. The historical nature of God's effort was not lost on the survivors of the exile who heard this version of the Book of the Law. In addition to a new sense of God's involvement with the workings of history, the exiled Jews added another element to their emerging religion. Where before the exiles, the Hebrew prophets had been mainly concerned with the social issues of Israel and its relationship to God's plan for it, after the return, the focus shifted to an ever greater apocalypse, one of cosmic proportions. It was as if they had learned something of great importance while exiled in Babylon. They had come back with many new spiritual perspectives, a belief in angels and a redemptive Messiah among them. But the most important of these means was the conviction that the world would end in a great celestial apocalypse. The Old Testament prophets, from the Greek word for ecstatic utterances, appeared around 1000 BCE as a type of monotheistic shaman. The Nevi'im, or God speakers, were considered, along with the priests and the sages, to be crucial for the spiritual health of the Hebrew people. There were great numbers of these prophets who performed frenzied rituals of dancing and chanting for large and enthusiastic crowds, not unlike the rituals that are accompanied by the state oracle of Tibet. Both ended with prophetic announcement. Taking their cue from Adam and Eve's banishment from the garden and the flood, the prophets soon began to focus on the sinful nature of Israel and God's approaching day of wrath. Amos started the trend around 760 BCE, which continued in increasing urgency until the prophecies came true. Jeremiah, the prophet of the Babylonian conquest around 600 BCE, was first to connect the fate of Israel with the ultimate destiny of the cosmos. He predicted the heavens will shudder with pure horror at God's punishment. For those who experienced the Babylonian conquest, it certainly felt like the end of the world. What had been the essentials of God's favor, a homeland, a temple, and the right of kingship, had all been taken away and destroyed. Ezekiel, who was a priest of the temple at the time of the conquest, marks the beginning of the new apocalyptic prophets. Like Jeremiah, he predicted the end of the Israelite nation and the destruction of the temple. Ezekiel, however, used an amazing variety of symbols: fiery wheels, dry bones, chariots, and multi-headed angels of marvelous countenance, to create a surreal image of transformative and apocalyptic processes. He brings together almost all the elements used by future prophets to describe the end of the world and adds a few new ones: a king from the house of David who will rule all of mankind, the idea of a purified elect who will survive, and most important of all, the rebuilding of the great temple at Jerusalem as God intended it to be. The image of a physical New Jerusalem laid the foundation for the temple imagery in the book of Revelation and contributed to the Gnostic idea of Chiliasm. Hang on 1 second. It's super dry and windy here. But it was the second Isaiah, a contemporary exile of Ezekiel's, who created the image of the apocalyptic Messiah from Zarathustrian ideas. The Hebrew in exile absorbed many foreign ideas. Only during the period of exile did the idea of a redeemer enter Hebrew eschatology. The Messiah, as predicted by Zarathustra, will come wage war on the forces of evil and overcome the darkness. Second Isaiah adds to this vision Isaiah adds to this vision a Messiah, as Ezekiel said, from the house of David, who will be scourged and rejected. His message will be taken up more by the Gentiles than the Jews, but in the end, the Jews will be proclaimed as God's chosen ones. A new covenant will be declared, and a new heaven and a new earth will be created. The wasteland will be fertile again, and the sun will never set. It was this image of the Messiah that informed the thinking and actions of Jesus. He seemed to have designed his teaching experiences to meet the expectation of the second Isaiah prophecies. And those around him who thought he was the Messiah knew and understood these apocalyptic connotations. The common belief about the end of the world at the time Jesus began his teachings included several key components. The first of the end would be the rebellion of Israel, God's people, against the evil forces of Gog, the evil king of darkness. Gog was usually identified by all as the Roman Empire. In the 100 years or so prior to Jesus' birth, several such rebellions had taken place. One led by Judah Maccabee had almost succeeded. However, every attempt at a revolt served only to tighten Rome's grip. Following the rebellion would come the day of the Lord, the last judgment, the manifestation of God's wrath on the wicked. Then the nation of Israel would be reunited and all the exiles would return. The dead would be resurrected so that they could experience the final stage, the reign of the Messiah in the new earthly paradise, with, of course, the divinely rebuilt temple center. In this context, the role of the Messiah was simple: defeat the evil king of the world, the demiurge, and usher in the golden age. It is difficult to know exactly how Jesus saw himself against these expectations. No one recorded Jesus' teachings during his lifetime. For 35 years after his death, his ideas lived on only in spoken words of missionaries and teachers. Jesus' teachings adapted themselves spontaneously to the expectation of their listeners. To his contemporaries, Jesus appeared to be a miracle-working magi of a sort all too common in troubled Palestine. He was seen by outsiders as similar to other great magicians, such as Apollonius of Tyana, who also had several gospel-like lives written about him. Galilee, Jesus' homeland, had only recent, in the 1st century BCE, converted to Judaism. It still retained a strong flavor of native paganism. In this background, Jesus' primary significance derived from his ability to work miracles. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Magi, Zarathustrian astronomers, and philosophers followed a star to Jesus' birth. They were prophet-like figures with distinct ethical and eschatological teachings. Jesus became a similar figure who taught of the kingdom of heaven, attracted followers, and performed feats of magic. The difference was a specific emphasis on the Jewish Messiah concept, on Jewish messianic concepts. Jesus declared himself as the Son of Man. 2nd Isaiah's title for Zarathustra's Redeemer, the suffering and triumphant Savior. But the mystery at the core of his teaching, the secret of Christianity, was the nature and timing of the arrival of the kingdom of heaven. There could be no doubt that Jesus left his earthly followers with the impression that the world would soon end. His death and resurrection symbolized the triumph of the righteous over the evil king of the world, and his return would herald the beginning of the next phase, the day of judgment. He even declared that some living at that moment would still be alive when he returned. If the end was expected at any moment, then there was no need to record Jesus' teachings. After many years, when the return still had not happened, the older members of the community began to record their memories. The Gospels came from these early sources. Mark's Gospel, written around 70 CE, used a common teaching document known as Q as the source around which the author wove the story of Jesus' life. Matthew, the next gospel to be written down between 80 and 100 CE, used a similar technique and sources, but applied to them a much greater level of understanding. Matthew gives us more complete glimpse of Jesus's teachings on the end of the world and the coming kingdom of heaven. It was written by someone who had grasped the mystery at the core of Christianity. From Matthew, we hear of Jesus's Egyptian connections, the Star of Bethlehem and the journey of the wise men from the east, the massacre of the innocents, the temptation of the Messiah, and many other stories with deep esoteric significance. The mystery is openly proclaimed in Matthew at the beginning of Jesus's career. Matthew quotes 2nd Isaiah, quote, "The people living in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned," unquote. To fulfill this prophecy, Matthew tells us that Jesus began to preach, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near." To see this a little more clearly, we need to step outside Christianity for a moment and look at another Egyptian magical text. This one from the Paris Papyrus, one of the gems discovered in Egypt by Napoleon's savants. In Papyrus 4, lines 475 to 830, we find a ritual to attain immortality through inhaling light. The aspirant is first told to perform 7 days of rituals and then 3 days of dark retreat. On the morning of the 11th day, the aspirant is to face the rising sun and to perform an invocation, quote, first source of all sources, perfect my body, so that I may participate again in the immortal beginning, that I may be reborn in thought, and that the Holy Spirit may breathe in me, unquote. With this, the aspirant inhales the first rays of the rising sun and then leaves his body behind and rises into the heavens filled with light. Quote, "For I am the son of the sun. I surpass the limits of my soul. I am a magical symbol of the light." In Matthew 5:14, Jesus declares, "You are the light of the world." This also echoes the Emerald Tablet in equating successful transformation with the spontaneous emission of light or illumination. The Lord's Prayer, which appears in Matthew 6:9-13, also suggests the Emerald Tablet on earth as it is in heaven, as above, so below. When the kingdom of heaven is achieved, Jesus declares then, heaven and earth above and below will be the same. Chapters 24 and 25 provide a blueprint to the coming apocalypse, telling us, quote, "The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky," unquote. Jesus also tells us that it will be like in the days of Noah before the return of the Son of Man, except that no one will know the exact day or hour. No one, that is, except the initiated. Matthew 24, verse 43 and 44 suggests that those who follow the Son of Man will indeed be able to calculate the time and so be waiting in preparation. When he returns, chapter 25, verse 31 tells us, he will separate the sheep from the goats, the subtle from the gross, on the basis of their compassion for their fellow men. In Matthew, we also find the account of Mary Magdalene's witness to the resurrection, complete with its own light metaphor. Quote, "His appearance was like lightning," unquote, we are told, and Mary does not at first recognize him. Matthew's account of the resurrection ends with Christ's ascension in Galilee and his pronouncement of the Great Commission. The last line, which goes to the heart of the mystery, quote, "And surely I'm with you always, even to the end of the world," unquote. At the core of Christianity, then, we find an alchemical transformation and the knowledge of the end of time. The Gnostics understood and embraced this view of Christianity. For a brief shining moment, it seemed as if the knowledge of the path of return was about to triumph over the evil demiurge and his prison of matter. The hope it offered remains the promise at the heart of Jesus's teachings. As the Gnostics thought the Messiah opened the way, and just as quickly, the demiurge closed it again. So that is a whopper of a chapter that really, I think, is one of the best explanations for early Christianity and what it believed, and how it was intertwined with the apocalypse. You know, death is a very important part of life. When you die, there's are serious things that occur in your soul and your spirit that must happen. And so the apocalypse, and it's a good thing. It's a blissful thing. And I think that's what the apocalypse is going to be like too. It's going to be, you know, a wonderful thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a necessary spiritual event that will happen. And will it happen in a bang, or will it happen slowly? Well, we don't know. Cross-Hende says it happens in a bang. So, and we may be approaching that point, by the way. In alchemy, when your philosopher's stone, it changes colors, and when it goes to yellow, which you're nearing the end stage, and when the philosopher's stone turns from yellow to white, it's ready for to do its work. And when 30 years ago, if you're as old as I am, you remember that the sun used to be yellow, but now the sun is white, and that should probably act as some kind of warning to us that the very thing that gives us light, that gives us immortality, that creates the plants and everything, has changed color. And that should concern everybody, because that means something is going on. Other than that, we got in the ritual from the Paris Papyrus about how to inhale light, which I talked about in my show, Secrets of Light and Dark. If you want to get more into that one, that was just a fragment, but a very, very useful fragment showing that they are using light and dark to achieve things, probably in the pineal gland. So that's it. That's the show today, and thanks for watching. We'll be back next week with another section, another chapter of the book. I'm Jay Widener, and hit like, subscribe, and tell all your friends. Sayonara.